Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 190, Why It Could Be Too Late to Build Your Bones, but Not Too Late to Protect Them. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. I'm Shelley Rael, registered dietitian nutritionist, and in this episode, why it could be too late to build your bones, but not too late to protect them, is what I'm going to discuss on Try Not to Be Too Dire, but ensuring that you are doing all you can to help your bones today. Now, May, as this episode is being recorded and comes out, May is Osteoporosis Awareness and Prevention Month. And this topic is something that I have been focusing on for more than 25 years. It was my primary focus when I was doing my master's program. And it's really so much about bringing awareness of osteoporosis. While there's most of the things we should do are earlier in life, we still can do things later in life. And I want to clarify a couple things here. When most people think of osteoporosis, they tend to think this is something that only happens to, quote, old ladies. But really, the truth is so much more nuanced than that. So I want to bust some myths here, clarify this thing that often happens is this confusion between osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. And more importantly, talk about what you can still do at any age to help protect your bones. All right, first up, what is osteoporosis? Well, literally means porous bone, and it's a condition where the bones can become weak and brittle, so much so that even a minor fall or a bump can lead to a fracture. So when I say a minor fall, this could be tripping and falling, and as kids, young adults, it might have been just a pain, embarrassment. And as an adult with osteoporosis, it could be a hip fracture, a wrist fracture. I also say a bump. I'm very, very good at bumping my hip against the corner of my bedpost or a kitchen counter or many things. And that's something where it's not a big deal at the moment, but if you have osteoporosis, that simple bump that's painful could also lead to a fracture. So this just isn't just an older adult problem or something that women alone face. So yes, it is more common in postmenopausal women, but it does affect men too. And for everyone, most people, I should say, it can go undiagnosed until the fracture happens. And I mentioned earlier, this is not the same as osteoarthritis. So osteoporosis is related to bone. Osteoarthritis is the joints and cartilage. And I bring this up because there's been times where I've been doing talks or have literature information about osteoporosis. And when I say who's at more risk, I've had people come up to me and correct me. And I realize they're talking about osteoarthritis. Again, different than osteoporosis. So again, the osteoarthritis is joints and cartilage, can affect everybody, anybody. Osteoporosis is bone density and strength, can affect anybody and everybody, but it's more prevalent in older age and more prevalent in women. But I do want to address some of these myths and facts. So this common myth is that only women get osteoporosis. And really, the fact is, up to 25% of men over the age of 50 will experience an osteoporosis-related fracture. So again, while it's more common in women, men can get it. Not will get it, but they can get it. They can develop it. Another common myth is we don't need to worry about this until we're older. Well, unfortunately, this is a condition that we call a pediatric disease with adult consequences. So the fact is, our peak bone mass happens in our late 20s. And after that, it's all about maintaining what you've got. That bone building is in our teen years, in our 20s. And once we're past that, we aren't really building anymore. So yes, it's something that presents when you're older, but if we can do something when we're younger, that would be so much better. And unfortunately, most people don't learn about this until later in life. Another myth is, hey, if you take calcium, you're good. If you get calcium in your diet, that's good enough. But really, bone health is so much more than calcium. It's about vitamin D, it's about protein, it's about physical activity, and even collagen, perhaps. I'll get to that in a minute. But I also want to mention, too, it's more than calcium. When people talk about milk and they're looking at milk alternatives like oat milk and almond milk, people talk about the calcium in those. But we've got to look at the vitamin D and the protein in those as well. They're not all created equal. So let's talk about risk. First up, I want to say, even if you don't have these risks, you still should pay attention. But there's modifiable risk factors, and then there's the non-modifiable risk factors. So of course, non-modifiable, things we can't really change. Age. We can deny it all we want, but we are getting older. And as we get older, generally over the age of 50, is when the risk goes up. Non-modifiable is female sex, female birth sex. That is just part of a non-modifiable risk factor, regardless of what somebody identifies as. Family history of osteoporosis or fractures. And if you don't know your family history, one, ask, or if you happen to be where you don't know your family, just keep in mind that's a possibility, but doesn't mean you're all clear. A small body frame. Now, when I was younger, I thought this was a myth, and it turns out it's not a myth, but if you take your thumb and middle finger and wrap it around your wrist, do your fingers overlap? Not your nails, but your fingers. Or do they just touch, or do they barely touch? Now, if they overlap, you do probably have a small body frame. You can actually take a wrist circumference measurement. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what those numbers are, but it's that finger and middle finger and thumb is a good indicator of whether you have a small body frame. Again, if it overlaps. And then a non-modifiable risk factor is early menopause, or more specifically, when menopause does occur, that's when we have this significant decline in bone density in that year following menopause. Now, the modifiable things we can do something about. Sedentary lifestyle increases your risk. Smoking, use of any tobacco products increases your risk. Excessive alcohol intake increases your risk. Low calcium or low vitamin D intake, low vitamin D status. You can fix that. Eating disorders or severely restrictive diet. So if you do have a history of an eating disorder, that is potentially, depending on the type of eating disorder, a risk factor for osteoporosis. But if you have a history of severely restrictive diet in your life, especially over multiple years, that is an increased risk of osteoporosis. And long-term use of steroids. Now, people tend to think of steroids as the kind for bodybuilding and that sort of thing, but really like corticosteroids, which are used for treatment of various health conditions, are also in that category. So like asthma. So, what can we do about the bones? Well, can we build bones after 30? As I said, we get that peak bone mass in our 20s, and we can't really build up bones after about the age of 30. Most of us have reached our peak bone mass at that point. But what we can do is we can maintain what we've got and slow that loss. So I've always said, think of this as putting money in the bank, like a savings account. When you get older, you may not be able to add as much, or it won't build up as quickly, but you can keep what's in there from being depleted too quickly. So the earlier we can put money in the bank, money in the savings, like putting calcium in the bones, the better. So when it comes time to withdraw later, you've got more that can be lost. Not that we want more to be lost, but there's more density there. So that little bit that is lost over the years, you still have plenty of calcium and bone density. Now, I want to talk about foods first that can help with bone health, again, at all ages. So, number one, this is what everybody knows about calcium. Now, dairy products. Dairy products, the most absorbable and what I should say, I do say bioavailable form of calcium. So our bodies do like that type of calcium that's found in dairy products. We also get calcium from leafy greens and fortified foods. So those almond milks or oat milks are fortified foods. It's not the same type of calcium that's found in dairy products, not the same absorbability. And when it comes to leafy greens or things like broccoli, the amount of bioavailable calcium is different than what is listed. So for example, I've seen plenty of times where people say you can get the same amount of calcium out of a cup of broccoli than you can from a cup of dairy. Yes and no. While the number may appear the same, you actually have to have that cooked broccoli, and to get the same amount of absorbable calcium, it's closer to 10 cups of cooked broccoli. So while these are sources of calcium, what people don't tend to think of or know about is how much we can actually absorb from that. And as adults, we need about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams of calcium per day. And we don't want to get that from supplements, one, because we can't really absorb more than 500 milligrams at a time. But the foods are loaded with other nutrients as well. Vitamin D, this one has become more in the forefront over calcium. Both are important, but vitamin D is really important in helping us absorb the calcium. So if we're not having adequate vitamin D, any calcium we may be getting may not be able to be absorbed. So vitamin D is something that more people are aware of now. We do get it from UV light, sunlight. We get it from fatty fish. We get it in egg yolks and fortified products. Fortified products, people talk about vitamin D milk. Well, all milk is required, all cow's milk, I should say, is required to be fortified with vitamin D. So when people say they have vitamin D milk, that's like from non-fat to whole milk, that's all got vitamin D. But that's one source. The sunlight, if you live in higher latitude, so more north or farther from the equator, especially in the winter, you may need to get extra vitamin D from food or potentially supplements because you may not have as much exposure to sunlight. If you wear sunscreen faithfully, you may need to consider another vitamin D source. But this is something where you can get a blood test to see if you need more vitamin D. And I had a client recently whose blood test showed that they were really, really, really high in their vitamin D status and needed to back off on their supplement. So it is possible to get toxic amounts. Protein. Protein is vital for bone structure. People don't tend to think of protein as being important, but really, adequate protein is part of the bone repair and density. So we're going through a cycle of bone breakdown and building back up throughout our life. There's this constant turnover. It just, which turnover, like more breaking down or more building up is happening is at different points in our life. But protein is important for that. So protein is important for so many things in our body. This happens to be one of those. Now there's some other nutrients people don't tend to think about when it comes to bone health. And magnesium, vitamin K, phosphorus, these all play a role in bone health. And these are found in whole grains, vegetables, nuts, seeds. Most people don't need to supplement with magnesium or magnesium or vitamin K or phosphorus. Just be aware that these are important for bone health. Now, I want to take a little side trip here, talk about collagen peptides, because I do get this question a lot as it relates to joint and bone health. So really want to emphasize this. Collagen is one of the most abundant proteins in our body, and it's a big component of bones. So it provides the framework so minerals like calcium can fill it in. Now, what is an important part of collagen is getting adequate vitamin C. So to have your collagen in your body be able to be strong, you do want to make sure you're getting adequate vitamin C. Now, there is some emerging research that suggests that a specific type of bioactive collagen peptides may support bone health, particularly in postmenopausal women. Now, here's some details here. A randomized controlled trial, that means there was people who were part of the study and they were randomized to either get the collagen peptides or not get the collagen peptides. They didn't really know, not that it would matter in this case, because it's not like you can fake bone density changes. And over these two groups, they found that when people had their daily collagen supplementation, there was improvements in bone mineral density over 12 months. And a follow-up 4 years later showed that those who continued the supplementation maintained higher bone density than those who stopped. And collagen peptides combined with calcium and vitamin D seems to have a synergistic effects. But there's a few things I want to mention here. That randomized controlled trial in the final part, when it came to the end of those 12 months, it was less than 100 subjects between the two groups. So the group that got the collagen supplements versus the ones that didn't, combined, there was less than 100 people who finished the study. So meaning about 50 were the ones who got the collagen supplements, about 50 didn't. The other thing too is they recommended or had information about how exercise and other nutrients in the diet, like the calcium and the vitamin D, were important, but they didn't control for that in the study. So want to say that. So let's just keep it at 100, even though it was less than 100. So all of them may or may not have taken calcium or vitamin D. All of them may or may not have done any type of weight-bearing activities. So we didn't, in that study, which considering this is a small study, it didn't control for those other factors. So we don't know for sure if the collagen peptides were what had the effect. It did have that the vitamin D and the calcium were helpful. And at the same time, it still wasn't known for sure if that was part of it. So again, keeping in mind, follow up 4 years later, those who continued the supplementation had higher bone density than those who stopped, but that still wasn't even close to that 100. Think about what you were doing 4 years ago, even 5 years ago, and whether you're taking supplements regularly or not. That can be varied, and it's hard to know all the factors. So it's possible, could be likely, that a specific bioactive collagen peptide can help with this, but we can't depend on that alone. It may be helpful, but it might not be. It might be other factors. So these supplements, would be part of a comprehensive strategy to help with your bones, especially if you're at higher risk. And with that said, just want to say this. Check with a professional before starting any new supplement. A lot of people take collagen and they have this idea it has some kind of special health benefits, when in the big picture, most of the time it's just another protein source. Now, I did mention a bit about weight-bearing activity, so I want to talk about that a little bit more, that fitness and exercise for strong bones. Movement is one of the most effective ways to help with bone health. So I said, one of the modifiable risk factors is sedentary lifestyle. So one of the big things here is weight-bearing exercise. So what this means is things where your foot comes off the ground and goes back down. So this is walking, hiking, jogging, dancing, any type of jumping. So all of these are ways that we signal our bones to keep building or maintaining. Something like biking or swimming is good for you, but not considered a weight-bearing activity. So that's not helping your bones. And like I said, walking or hiking or jogging, it doesn't have to be a running hard thing. Strength training. Strength training is so important. So that could be lifting weights, that could be using resistance bands, or even your own body weight can help maintain and potentially improve our bone density, but again, maintaining. And it also can help with maintaining the muscle mass to help us have less incidence of falling. And then with falling, balance and flexibility activity like yoga, tai chi, core exercises, working our core front and back, can help reduce the risk of fall. And the fall is the big cause of fractures in older adults. And there's plenty of times where I've seen cases where people have fallen and been down on the floor for hours and sometimes days because they don't have the strength to get back up. And it may seem startling, but it's pretty remarkable how people don't maintain their muscle mass. And it can be maintained at any age. And when they fall, they're unable to pick themselves back up. So doing these things regularly, you don't have to be at the gym daily. Keep in mind, resistance bands or body weight activities are certainly things you can do. And one of the things I do, I haven't mentioned them in a while. I have 3 dogs. They are walked every single day. So just that walking is helpful. Now, those final things, those lifestyle habits that can't go without saying, obviously, quit smoking. This is something where there's so many risk factors when we smoke, and it does accelerate bone loss. It actually burns through vitamin C more quickly, which is helpful for collagen production and means we're not able to build up good collagen if we aren't getting appropriate vitamin C. And when somebody uses nicotine products, they need more vitamin C. Limit alcohol. More than 1 to 2 drinks per day increases risk. And that may seem like a lot, more than 1 to 2 drinks per day. Who has drinks daily? Trust me, lots of people do. Sleep. Rest supports overall health. It helps with hormone balance. It helps with bone repair. When we're sleeping, that's when there's a lot of repair and maintenance going on in the body. So it's really, really important. And then fall prevention. I talked about the strength training and balance to help with fall prevention. But one of the big things too is working on less clutter in the home, handrails, good lighting. In some cases, carpets or the throw rugs need to be removed because it's a tripping hazard. So you may not think of that right now, but that's a tripping hazard. And then, of course, as I say, my dogs are also a tripping hazard. So I'm extra careful when they're hovering in the kitchen underfoot or when we're on the walks. Got to be careful to not get tangled up. All right, so some final thoughts here. Maybe we can't build up the bones like we could have or should have in our teens and 20s. But there is so much we can do to protect the structure we already have. So whether you're 35, 55, or 75, small changes in your nutrition, your movement, and your lifestyle can make up to be a meaningful difference. And going back to that collagen, it may not be a bad option when paired with other bone supportive habits, but please don't think that's going to be the magic. It's not. All right. With that, that's it for this episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. If you found this helpful, share it with someone, share the information in there with someone. And if you think there's people who think they're too old to worry about their bones, or they're not old enough to worry about their bones, share this information with them. All right, with that, have a great week. You take care, and bye for now.